the hostile skies of Iraq. Air warfare will be transformed in the fury of Operation Desert Storm. State-of-the-art American war machines go head-to-head with battle-hardened Iraqi pilots flying French and Soviet-built fighters. Now, you're in the cockpit. As modern air combat is forged in a high-tech battle for air supremacy. Experience the battle. Dissect the tactics. Relive the dogfights of Desert Storm. January 17th, 1991. In the early morning hours, an EF-111A Raven penetrates enemy airspace above western Iraq. Operation Desert Storm has kicked off. The air war is about to go hot. Captain Jim Denton maneuvers the Raven through the inky blackness, just 1,000 feet above the desert.
The EF-111 is really a Cadillac of low-flying airplanes. It was designed specifically to fly very stable at very high speeds and down low.
In the right seat next to Denton is Captain Brent Brandon. While Denton pilots the Raven, Brandon's job is to blind Iraqi radar emitters with the big jet's powerful jamming gear.
So we're like the blocking fullback that goes through the line and shuts down radars so that the guys carrying the bombs can come in behind us, pop up, and then deliver the ordnance.
Denton and Brandon are at the tip of the spear, with a large strike force in tow, targeting missile sites between a pair of Iraqi airfields. If they succeed, Denton and Brandon will carve an electronic swath through which F-15E Strike Eagles will safely pass to put laser-guided bombs on target. F-15C fighters fly top cover at 30,000 feet, added protection in case any American planes are jumped by the enemy.
So we're embedded with 22 fire eaters out there going to take names and kick ass.
In the cockpit of the Raven, electronic warfare officer Brent Brandon goes to work.
Well, they gave us 10 high-powered jammers, and those jammers are like flashlights, and when the radar tries to pick up the good guys, we blind them with this radar in the bomb bay.
The ALQ-99 computerized jammer instantly zeroes in on the radar frequency. Brandon releases megawatts of radiated energy.
You know, hair comes up on the back of your neck and the jet starts to crackle with all this electronic energy, and it literally feels electric.
The Iraqi radars are blinded. The Strike Eagles are cleared hot and begin hitting their targets.
We're between the two largest airfields at 5,000 feet. We are in the front row seat in Desert Storm.
Their anti-aircraft radars gone, the Iraqis desperately scramble jets against the intruders.
About 2 minutes later, 2 caps are airborne for the Iraqis. One of them comes out of the H-2 airport, one of them comes out of the vicinity of Baghdad.
The crew gets an unfriendly hit on their radar acquisition warning system. An Iraqi Mirage F-1 rolls in from above and behind the EF-111. Denton and Brandon are in serious trouble. The Raven was never meant to dogfight. The EF-111A is an electronic warfare variant of the F-111 Aardvark fighter bomber. Nicknamed Sparkvark, all armament was removed to make way for the radome on the underside of the fuselage that housed transmitter antennas, and the pod on the vertical stabilizer that housed receiving antennas. The Dassault Mirage F-1 is a French-built single-seat air superiority fighter. The Iraqis had over 100 F-1s in their arsenal, and they used them with great success in the Iran-Iraq War. In a dogfight, the Mirage has every advantage. It has a faster rate of climb, far greater agility, and is heavily armed with 30mm cannon and air-to-air missiles. The Raven is completely unarmed. The Mirage closes in from 5 o'clock high on its helpless prey. Jim Denton will have to survive by his wits.
I felt based on our training we could beat it, just straight up, get away from it. And that was our primary job, to get away from it, to get our jammers back on and get back to work. So what I did was I just snapped us inverted and just started a left turning slice back to the left.
It's a simple defensive move that will hopefully position the Americans' jet engines out of the line of fire of the Mirage's heat-seeking missiles. But the Iraqi jet is already in radar missile range. The menacing tone of a radar lock pulses into Denton's headset. Looking over his right shoulder, Brandon spots the missile flash.
It's like someone looking in a dark night and watching someone light a cigarette and then watching the cigarette come towards you.
And I hear missile launch right side. And I'm going, what? He says, missile launch right side, brake right. So at this point, I'm completely blind at 400 feet at night, and I've got a missile coming at me.
Denton snaps the big Raven to the right, pulling with all his strength. By braking sharply into the threat, Denton is attempting to overwhelm the missile's electronic circuitry.
It's a highly dangerous maneuver. You're basically doing a high rolling, high G turn, down low.
Denton and Brandon take 5 Gs of abuse, the maximum their aircraft can sustain.
You can have soft G or you can have hard G, and this was some hard G.
Brandon pumps out chaff. Strips of aluminum meant to confuse the warhead. The tactic works. The missile streaks past the Raven and disappears into the night. But the Mirage is still on the Raven's 6 and not about to give up. Luckily, the cavalry arrives. An F-15C, piloted by Robert Grader, is on a cap mission high above the dogfight. Grader has already bagged one F-1 tonight and quickly locks the second Mirage up, preparing for a long-range Sparrow missile shot. Grader is here. The Mirage is here, behind Denton and Brandon's Raven. The Iraqi pilot, already target fixated on the Raven, now has to deal with the piercing shriek of Grader's missile lock in his headset. He momentarily loses his situational awareness. A fatal mistake at 400 feet. In a sudden, brilliant flash of light, the Mirage slams into the ground.
We saw the fireball just spit out in front of us. It slid and hit in front of us about 2 o'clock, right, 2 o'clock.
Grader, the F-15 pilot, is credited with the victory. But Denton and Brandon are awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for their role in the maneuvering kill.
The Mirage F-1 was more than a match for an unarmed EF-111. But when they came down to play in our environment, they paid the cost on it.
The mission on the morning of the 17th is a complete success. The 671 combat sorties that night are the first combat test of a bold new strategy in aerial warfare. American tactics and technology in the 1980s and 90s were shaped by the lessons learned during the Vietnam War. The previous generation of fighter pilots had not been trained in air combat maneuvering, and they were forced to fly aircraft that were not specifically designed to dogfight. All of that had changed by 1990.
By 1990, with the Gulf War, The Air Force and the Navy had advanced on two fronts. One is they had advanced new fighters like the F-15 Air Superiority Fighter and the F-14 Interceptor Fighter. In addition, they had much better weapons. The Sparrow had improved, the Sidewinder had improved, and the pilot training had considerably improved.
When Saddam Hussein seized Kuwait on August 2nd, 1990, and the drums of war began to beat, American air power faced its greatest threat in decades.
The Iraqis had MiG-29 interceptors, they had MiG-23s, they had French F-1s, and pilots and ground commanders had experience fighting with the Iranians. Thus, the U.S. really organized in a way to create an overkill situation where we had to use all of our assets against a prepared adversary.
Electronic warfare aircraft could block enemy radars and clear corridors of attack for bombers, whose precision-guided munitions could take out command control centers and anti-aircraft defenses. AWACS could monitor the situation, calling out any airborne enemy aircraft to American fighters who could take them on. Tankers could feed the beast, keeping the entire war machine flying for hours on end. Such combined force was championed by Air Force fighter pilot and strategist Colonel John Boyd, who created a concept explaining how Allied energy should be used to defeat the enemy and survive, collectively known as the OODA Loop.
The OODA Loop stands for Observation, Orientation, Decision, and Action. What it really means is that you outthink and outact the adversary by knowing more, by destroying his capability to think at the same level that you are. What does this mean for warfare? What it means is if you can go out on the first night of the Gulf War and you can destroy by actively bombing or jamming the Iraqi radars, and then you can actually bomb and destroy their command and control centers, and you can scare the hell out of the commanders that do survive by blowing up his center and by disrupting it, that is what the OODA Loop means. You have scared the enemy, or you have destroyed his radars, and you've destroyed his capability to react.
The extraordinary use of Allied air power on January 17th works exactly as planned. Air Force and Navy planes have disrupted the Iraqis' ability to gather information and make decisions. 8 of their best fighter aircraft have been destroyed. Radar stations, command and control centers, and surface-to-air missile sites have been reduced to rubble. But as the war goes on, the Iraqi defense stiffens. More fighters rise to challenge the Americans. January 19th, 1991, 4 F-15C Eagles soar high above a cloud deck that obscures the desert sands of western Iraq. Captains Rick Tolini and Larry Pitts are number 1 and 2 in the 4-ship flight, providing escort to a massive coalition strike package.
Well, as it turned out, just as we were finishing up our refueling, the AWACS called out, at that time, bogies approximately 60 to 80 miles north of us.
The 4 Eagles break off to engage the threat. Within seconds, they have multiple radar contacts.
I saw 2 groups of airplanes, one straight in front of us, which had been called out as MiG-25s at about 10,000 feet heading straight south, and another group about 30 degrees right of us at about 50 miles, which had been called out as MiG-29s, and they were also heading at us. So they were heading south-southwest.
The MiG-29s are closer and present the greatest threat. Pitts targets the 29s until the bandits surprise him.
They turned around and started heading back towards Baghdad. So they turned cold, which meant they were no longer a threat to us at that point. So my radar work went back to the group of MiG-25s who were right in front of us.
The MiG-25 Foxbat is a very high-speed interceptor, capable of Mach 2.83. It was designed to catch up to even the fastest American aircraft and take them down with radar-guided or infrared missiles. The F-15C Eagle is the premier air superiority fighter in the U.S. Air Force arsenal, a mixture of unprecedented maneuverability and acceleration, range, weapons, and avionics. The MiG has the edge in raw speed, but the Eagle's weapons, radar, and agility far outclass the Foxbat. At 25 miles, the Americans used their radar to lock the MiG-25s up. But these Iraqi pilots are skilled and aggressive.
The MiG-25s actually executed a Soviet-based anti-Eagle radar tactic.
The MiG pilot spits out chaff to cloak his maneuvering as he dives low to blend in with ground reflections.
They turned directly to the west and went down very low and actually broke our radar locks, and we lost them for a little while.
But abruptly, one of the MiG-25s turns back into the Americans.
The MiG-25 turns back in, which is the tactic, hoping he'll see us before we see him.
And just then, the second MiG-25 gets Pitts' attention. Pitts is here on the far right side of the American flight. The MiG-25 is here, passing across his nose at supersonic speed along the desert floor. Pitts locks the bandit up and waits for the okay from flight lead Rick Tolini before he presses the attack.
He could say press, cleared, or negative. What he said was press, which means now he's going to support me and I can consider myself the flight lead and not to worry about him. I roll inverted and do a split S maneuver from 10,000 feet.
Pitts' maneuver will position him at the same level and behind his enemy, the perfect position for a missile shot. But it's a risky move. Pitts pulls an astonishing 12 Gs. The force takes man and machine to the absolute limits of survival.
Well, obviously the integrity of the airplane is a big concern, but I'll tell you, the Eagle's very strong. And trust me, there was enough adrenaline flow in there that it didn't even faze me.
For the first time, the American pilot spots his prey.
As I pull down, that's when I get the tally-ho on the MiG-25. And there's still that low cloud deck down there, so I can see him on top of that cloud deck.
If the MiG-25 pilot lights the afterburners and accelerates straight ahead, he could outrun Pitts. But the Iraqi decides to enter a turning fight with his much more agile opponent.
He's a MiG-25 doing 700 knots. His turn radius is the size of Texas. I'm in an F-15 at fighting airspeed in the mid-400s. My turn radius is about 3,200 feet. So I'm very quickly inside of his turn. Before he completes the 180 degrees of turn, I'm in weapons parameters.
The desperate Iraqi leans hard on the stick.
He's turning very hard to try to defeat me, which means he's bleeding off quite a bit of airspeed.
Pitts closes to within 9,000 feet, carefully selecting his weapon.
Because of the big burner plume coming out of the airplane, I chose to select a heat-seeking missile, an AIM-9 Sidewinder. When I selected that missile, I got a good tone from it. I uncaged it to make sure the seeker is tracking his burner plume.
But the Iraqi pilot is well versed in countermeasures.
The missile tracks true to the target, and the MiG-25 puts out flares and decoys the missile. I had a backup. I selected AIM-7 because it's radar guided. I see it in the heads-up display as a big circle. It's telling me to shoot, 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 which means it's in weapons parameter. So I launched this missile.
The Sparrow guides to the target, but fails to explode. So Pitts goes to a second heat seeker. The Iraqi decoys the missile with another batch of flares. Captain Pitts may have met his match.
This guy is fighting hard. And I'm thinking to myself, if the missiles aren't going to work, I'm going to have to go gun this guy, which is not an easy solution when he's at 300 feet doing 500 knots and not in a turn.
Pitts unleashes his last AIM-7. This one has got to work.
And I fire the missile from 6,000 feet behind him, and it looks to me like it goes right up his tailpipes and blows up the back end of his airplane.
Dodging debris, Pitts catches sight of flight leader Rick Tolini high to his left. And about 5 miles off Tolini's nose, Pitts spots a glint.
And I'm thinking it's probably the other MiG-25.
The bandit is nose to nose with Tolini and closing fast. But Tolini doesn't want to take a shot. At this angle, the bogey looks like an F-15.
So Rick decided he needed to identify this airplane, and he did it in an extremely unique way. He calls out on the radio with the assumption that if it's a bad guy, he's not on our frequency, is anybody an afterburner? And because we see a big afterburner plume coming out of this airplane.
Tolini's gamble pays off. There's no F-15 in afterburner, so that plume means he's facing a MiG. Tolini fires an AIM-9.
I see the missile come off. I also see flares come out of this airplane, and the heat-seeking missiles once again decoyed by flares. These two MiG-25 pilots were fighting very hard.
But the Iraqi pilot makes a fatal mistake.
Now the airplane turns what we call belly up to us, so we're seeing the underside of its belly, which is not a great place for the MiG to be. Rick selects an AIM-7 Sparrow radar-guided missile and fires it. That airplane just turns into a ball of dust.
The Iraqis have lost 2 MiGs, but the coalition has stirred a hornet's nest. Less than 100 miles away, another pair of F-15 pilots are about to square off against the most advanced fighters in the Iraqi arsenal. January 19, 1991, 4 F-15C Eagles streak through Iraqi airspace. Captain Cesar Rodriguez leads the flight. He's known as Rico, and his number 2 is Captain Craig Underhill, call sign Mole.
Our initial mission was we were defensive counter-air, and our job was to protect the high-value assets, tankers, AWACS, rivet joint, everybody who was in support of the offensive counter-air missions which were moving forward.
But 5 hours into their flight, command calls to inform them their mission has changed. An Allied strike package has hit its target and needs fighter protection for the push back home.
They had asked us to help with their egress so that while they're pressing south, we can make sure there's nothing chasing them out.
Rodriguez splits his flight. He and Underhill will cover the bombers, leaving numbers 3 and 4 to protect the high-value assets. On the way to the target, the Eagles pick up some activity on their search radars. A pair of planes to the northeast, about 60 miles away.
With the help of AWACS and other assets that are in the area, and through a collective means, we were able to determine that these are 2 MiG-29s.
The Soviet-built MiG-29 Fulcrum is a Mach 2 capable air superiority fighter, the most advanced fighter aircraft in the Iraqi arsenal. The Eagle has a better radar and weapons platform, giving it the edge in long-range detection and destruction of enemy targets. But the MiG's better thrust-to-weight ratio gives it the advantage in maneuverability and rate of climb. Eagle pilots were advised not to get into close-quarters turning fights with Fulcrums, if they could avoid it, especially since Iraqi MiG-29 drivers were known to be combat-hardened veterans.
They took their best pilots out of their F-1s and stuck them in the MiG-29 when they got those from Russia. So we knew their pilots were combat qualified. We weren't, never been there, so that's an unknown for us.
Rodriguez and Underhill lock the MiG-29s up at 40 miles. The Iraqis break off and head east, trying to lure the F-15s within range of SAM sites near Baghdad. But AWACS quickly reports a new pop-up contact. Bogies, 330 for 13. Possible enemy fighters are at the Americans' 9 o'clock, barely 13 miles away and closing at the speed of heat.
I feel at that point that group is the one that represents the biggest threat to the strike package.
The Americans turn toward the west to head off the threat. The turn puts Rico about 1.5 miles in front of Underhill and about 1,000 feet below him. Underhill quickly gets a radar lock on one of the unidentified planes, trying to ID the bogey before the merge.
There's a lot of things you're doing with this hand and dialing gauges over here to make sure you're not going to shoot a friendly down.
We're all trying to do the first thing, which is identify friendlies to prevent a fratricide, and also equally as important is identify the hostiles.
With the opposing planes closing at Mach speed, there's only seconds remaining before the merge. At 8 miles away, AWACS finally calls the bandits out as hostiles.
By the time hostile is out of his mouth, I'm pushing down and shooting an AIM-7. It was just like a freight train coming away. It comes under my nose, starts pulling lead on the first airplane coming in.
At the same time, one of the bandits locks Rico up, throwing Rodriguez onto the defensive.
My defensive mindset is first to take my aircraft and get down below his plane of motion. So I want to get below 8,000 feet so that his radar is now looking at me or through me and includes the ground clutter.
Rodriguez cranks his Eagle to the left and dives, pumping out chaff.
About the time he starts turning, I'm watching my missile go, and here's Rico turning in front of me, here comes missile, plus or minus 200-300 feet right over the top of Rico's jet. So that was eye-opening for me, as imagine it was for him.
And I hear him call Fox. I turn left in my cockpit, and I actually pick up the engine, the motor of his AIM-7.
Rodriguez sees the smoke trail and follows it to the MiG-29, now 3.5 miles off his right wing.
I'm really kind of right now at the mercy of what that missile is going to do. And sure enough, the minute I picked up the silhouette, it couldn't have been more than 2 or 3 seconds later, and kaboom.
And he goes splash one, and I turn my head back around and look, and sure enough, big brown cloud there.
Rodriguez climbs to form up with Underhill.
We're building our mutual support again. And to be honest with you, my first thought process is let's get the hell out of here.
The pilots are about to egress to the south and hit the fuel tanker when a new warning interrupts them.
AWACS comes back again and tells us that there's another second contact 10 miles to the north. And again, I make the assessment here that we can't turn around and put this guy inside of a weapons engagement zone at our 6 o'clock. So, back into the fight.
Circling back toward the engagement zone, the Americans quickly pick the bogey up with radar. Underhill is here at 8,000 feet, about half a mile in front of Rodriguez. The bogey is here, 5 miles away at 10,000 feet. Underhill uses his radar's auto-acquisition mode to lock the bogey up.
I lock him up in auto guns. He does a convenient turn for me and breaks back left in a pretty hard G-turn.
The bogey's left turn exposes the aircraft's plan view to Underhill, a large target for a radar-guided AIM-7 Sparrow.
I lock him up, I turn, I put my nose on him, I go to shoot an AIM-7. Lights up as a diamond on my scope. It goes from a solid radar contact to a diamond, which tells me he's a friendly.
Underhill's heart sinks. If this plane is a friendly, then his first kill may have been a squadron mate. January 19th, 1991. After knocking down what he believed was an enemy aircraft, Captain Craig Underhill is facing the gut-wrenching possibility that he may have killed a squadron mate.
I tell you, that is just a terrible feeling. Fratricide was something that the Eagle community took very seriously.
Underhill and his flight lead, Rico Rodriguez, are now closing on a second unidentified bogey. Without confirmation the plane is hostile, he can't fire.
I go from aim 7 to aim 9, back to guns, and as I'm going through about 4,000 feet on this guy, he rolls and pulls, does about a 135 slice back into me.
The mystery plane breaks hard into Underhill. Despite the aggressive maneuver, Underhill checks his fire. He and Rico are being forced into a classic merge with the unidentified aircraft. Underhill climbs, positioning himself 9,000 feet above Rico. Rico works to gain visual identification. Underhill keeps the bogey locked up on radar, poised for a missile shot if Rico confirms the target is hostile.
So I will put my target detection box that's generated by the radar on the threat and see if I can VID this guy from, beyond visual range. If I can get a VID before we hit the merge, that gives Mole an opportunity to take a shot and then get this over with.
Underhill's F-15 is still IDing the bogey as a friendly. 9,000 feet below him, Rico closes head-on with the mystery plane, eyes outside the cockpit.
I was committed to the merge and to get as close as possible so as to establish the ID.
As the jets thunder past each other, Rico catches sight of the full silhouette.
I could see the Iraqi colors of his tail fin, the flag, MiG-29 silhouette. Call that it's a MiG-29. I start a left-hand turn, he starts a left-hand turn.
As each pilot struggles to turn inside his opponent, the fight descends. The MiG-29 pilot is at a slight advantage in this kind of fight, but with the ground rushing up at him, he may not be able to turn long enough to exploit his one strength.
So Rico and him are now off to the races going downhill. As Rico slides in, the guy rolls and pulls again, and now they're probably heading northwestish in a 135 slice as Rico's trying to get in position for fire on this guy.
It's a classic dogfight, not what the F-15 was designed to do, but well within its capability. From 8,000 feet, the fight spirals towards the deck.
As the fight migrates from the 8,000, 7,000, 6,000, below 5,000 and continues to drop down lower, the desert floor starts to become a definite factor.
Too close to use an AIM-7, Rodriguez fights to position himself for a heat-seeking Sidewinder shot. The ground rushes toward the Iraqi pilot. He knows he must brake in some direction. Abruptly, he rolls over and dives into a split S, daring the American to give chase. Rico doesn't bite. He skillfully coordinates the stick and rudder, pitching the F-15 vertical into a perch position to pounce on the Iraqi when he pulls out.
And before he actually hits perpendicular, he hit the desert floor, causing a fireball that just tumbles and tumbles and tumbles for what seems like an eternity to me.
Splash Fulcrum 2.
We found ourselves in two what I would call less than traditional scenarios for what the F-15 was built to do in the sense of long range, beyond visual range shooting.
Regardless, the victories demonstrate that in almost any scenario, the F-15 is a superb fighter aircraft. As the air war marched on, F-15 Eagle crews continued their dominance in the skies of Iraq. With their protection, strike aircraft continued pounding command and control bunkers, radar installations, and anti-aircraft gun and missile sites. F-15 pilots accounted for 13 air-to-air victories in the first 2 days of the war. Nearly all achieved thanks to the Eagle's unmatched capability for beyond visual range, or BVR, combat, the culmination of nearly a century of technological breakthroughs in aerial warfare.
As a result of all the advancements in electronic warfare and systems and surveillance, the Gulf War was the first time where we saw 2/3 of the air battle kills on the part of the U.S. and Allied forces were done by beyond visual range AIM-7 missiles.
In the early days of air combat, dogfighting was done close in with guns. As the missile age dawned, air combat became a more remote experience as the kill range skipped from yards to miles. Introduced during the Vietnam War, identification friend or foe equipment became a mandatory tool of modern air combat as dogfighting slipped beyond the range of human vision.
Both the U.S. and the North Vietnamese aircraft had IFF systems, which were transponders that said, hello, I'm a friendly, or I'm not a friendly. And that would help figure out who's what we call red and blue. Because the worst thing you would want is for a blue friendly to shoot down a blue friendly, which actually did occur a couple of times in the Vietnam Air War.
A transponder inside the plane is set with a code that transmits a certain frequency. If you're not squawking the same frequency, you're probably not a friend. When used in conjunction with E-3 Sentry AWACS planes, IFF was highly effective, making BVR kills possible.
With your setup, you would make sure that the AWACS understands where the friendlies are and where the bad guys are, and you would do a screen concept where you'd move forward and knock down any of the adversaries.
January 26, 1991. 4 F-15C Eagles soar over western Iraq. The flight lead is Captain Rory Drager with his wingman, Captain Tony Schiavi. Element lead is Captain Cesar Rodriguez with his wingman, Captain Bruce Till. West of Baghdad, at the northernmost portion of their cap rotation, AWACS picks up activity over H-2, a busy Iraqi airfield.
The first call we get is there's 4 aircraft taking off from H-2 and sort of heading to the northeast.
The Americans point their radars to the west, in the direction of the airfield.
We basically each do a sort of delayed 90-degree turn. So now that our 4-ship wall is now running, to the west-northwest.
They form a wall of eagles, flying line abreast across a span of 10 miles. This allows the Americans to mass their firepower while giving them the most coverage with their radars.
Everybody has their responsibilities. Some guys are looking low at the radar, some guys are looking high with the radar, so that we can make sure that we're covering anything that's flying from the surface of the ground to 50,000 feet.
Sure enough, 4 long-range radar contacts. There are no known friendlies in the area. These guys are probably MiGs. The Americans throttle up full military power. The deafening roar of 8 Pratt & Whitney turbofan engines echoes above the clouds. Though the enemy is far beyond visual range, the Eagles have spotted their prey. Drager wants to maintain the element of surprise. He issues a key order to his flight.
Let's keep our radars in sweep. Let's make sure we have everything sort of figured out and know how many of them there are and what we need to do from a targeting perspective.
A premature radar lock is a surefire way to scare off the enemy before they're within missile range.
Just like we have a radar warning receiver like a fuzzbuster in a car, they have the same thing. And so if you lock on to a target, that system is activated.
One of the Iraqi jets bugs out with mechanical difficulties. The remaining 3-ship flight stays low, less than 1,000 feet above the deck in a V formation. Combined force intel lets the Americans know what they're dealing with.
By this time, we have multiple IDs from the variety of different sources that are involved, and all of them confirm MiG-23.
The MiG-23 Flogger is a twin-engine fighter-bomber. Envisioned as an all-weather interceptor, its sturdy design made it stable at extremely high speeds, especially at low altitude. The bandits are ID'd, and the Americans are cleared hot to shoot.
We basically, had met our rules of engagement in order to be able to, to take action, and that's what we did.
Draeger assigns targets. He'll take the lead flogger. Schiavi will take the northernmost trailer. Rodriguez, the southernmost. The Americans lock the MiGs up on radar and push the button. AIM-7 Sparrows launch.
Missiles are flying in every direction, making sure that we, take these guys out.
Three huge explosions light up the sky. The F-15s dive through the clouds, just in time to see their missiles strike home. It's a textbook BVR mission. 3 bandits shot down from beyond visual range.
This particular engagement was, I think, very well done in the fact that not only did we get 3 kills, but as we start to egress out, everybody was checking each other's 6, everybody was doing what they needed to do to make sure that we carried this thing to its full conclusion and we're safely across the border and back home again.
In just over a month, Allied air power broke the back of the 5th largest air force in the world. In late February 1991, the air war is effectively over, having cleared the way for ground forces to retake Kuwait and chase Saddam Hussein's remaining forces back within their borders. Victory is declared in only 3 days. The coalition's triumph was an emphatic boost for current air war strategy. Multiple aircraft with specific roles working in concert to achieve victory.
Air warfare in 1990, as it is today, really is a team sport. Multiple weapons disrupted the Iraqi capability to deal with it. It was like an information overload. They just couldn't deal with the simultaneous strikes and the fact that their radars went offline, their command and control was shut down, jamming, deception. It was like having essentially a war nervous breakdown.
With Desert Storm, aerial warfare took a giant leap into the future. But Larry Pitts speaks for every man who has ever flown an aircraft into combat.
Aerial victory against an enemy airplane is a career highlight for me and something that I'll never be able to beat. But in my mind, I did what any fighter pilot would have done had an enemy airplane been put in front of him. I relied on my training, engaged the airplane, protected my wingman as he protected me, and came out of it alive.